Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you've been keeping up with the Battlefield Season 4 roadmap, then you know that Wake Island is coming back to Battlefield 6 next Tuesday. And if you played Battlefield for a while, you probably already know this map. Battlefield Studios has made quite a few changes to Wake Island this time around, and some of these changes could have a pretty big impact on how the map actually plays. So the developers recently released a full map guide explaining the thinking behind the new version of Wake Island, and as we do on this channel, instead of going through every single detail, I wanted to break it down from the perspective of a casual player. What actually matters, where you're going to be fighting, why did they add that random shipwreck? So let's break it down. First, it's worth talking about what Battlefield is actually bringing with Wake Island. So this map has been around since Battlefield 1942, and it obviously became one of the most recognizable maps in the franchise. We've seen it in Battlefield 2, Battlefield 1943, Battlefield 3, Battlefield 5, and now Battlefield 6. And Battlefield Studios says the Battlefield 5 version was essentially the starting point for this new version, but they didn't just copy and paste Battlefield 5's Wake Island into Battlefield 6. The developers actually tested a version that was very similar to Battlefield 5 and found some problems. One of the biggest issues was travel time, which I think was a problem in Sewer Reef as well. Some areas were simply too far apart, and in Breakthrough specifically, the second sector was proving extremely difficult for attackers to capture. So they started changing the layout, the objectives, vehicle distribution boundaries, and probably most importantly for infantry players, the amount and placement of cover. And that's one of the biggest themes throughout this entire developer guide. Wake Island is still supposed to feel open, but they don't want open to simply mean getting sniped every time you cross the map. So I really like what I'm hearing from this. And that brings us to what I think is probably the most interesting change on the entire map, and that's the central shipwreck. In previous versions of Wake Island, this central area was basically open water, and according to the developers, that created a pretty significant problem. It gave snipers a lot of visibility and made it difficult for infantry and boats to safely traverse the middle of the map. So instead of leaving that area empty, Battlefield Studios put a massive shipwreck right in the middle. And this isn't just there for decoration. The shipwreck actually gives infantry somewhere to take cover, creates another central point of interest, and gives boats and infantry multiple ways to approach the area. There's also zip lines that allow infantry to get to and from the shipwreck without having to swim across the water. And there's another interesting detail here. The shipwreck has an intact AA gun on the bridge. So if you're playing infantry and you get onto the shipwreck, you're not completely helpless against aircraft. That can make this area particularly important whenever the skies start getting busy. And I think this is one of the biggest things casual players should take away from the developer guide. Don't think of the water in the middle of Wake Island as a giant empty obstacle anymore. The shipwreck is deliberately there to turn that space into something you can actually play around. And this leads directly into the first official tip from the developers, which is get in the water. Wake Island is surrounded by water, and Battlefield Studios clearly wants naval warfare to be a major part of this map. So if you're playing Conquest, Breakthrough, or Escalation, don't automatically think that boats are something another player should be dealing with. The developers specifically designed several capture areas so that they extend into the water. That means boats can actually help capture and contest objectives. And that's important because this isn't just about getting from one side of the map to the other. A good boat player can actually influence the fight on land. You can help your squad reach an objective, attack an unexpected direction, provide fire, support, or force the enemy to split their attention. And if you're not comfortable with naval warfare, you don't necessarily have to jump into a boat. You can use the zip lines around the shipwreck and the bridges and tunnels around the island to move around without exposing yourself to every long-range sight line. The bigger takeaway is simply don't treat the water as a boundary. On Wake Island, the water is actually supposed to be part of the map this time around. The other major movement system I think casual players should know about is the underground tunnel network. There are tunnels connecting several of the major areas of Wake Island. There's one between the barracks and the hangar, another between the ammo depot and the hangar, and so forth. And there's even a larger tunnel between the depot and hangar that is big enough for large vehicles. So these aren't just little shortcuts, they're basically alternative routes through the island, and this is particularly important if you're playing infantry. If you're getting constantly picked off trying to run across an open area, look for the tunnel. If the enemy knows exactly where you're coming from, use the tunnel to approach from somewhere else. And if you need to get out of fight, these tunnels give you another escape route. The developers especially say they're intended to reduce travel time, create flanking opportunities, and give players ways to escape the firefights. So I would expect these tunnels to become some of the most important pieces of terrain on the entire map, especially for players using close-range weapons. The other major component of this update are the different points of interest. So let's quickly go through those major areas of the map. Starting with the radar station in the northwest, this is one of the major NATO surveillance areas and sits on higher ground. There's a large radar tower, an underground section, and several surrounding buildings. The developers say there are multiple routes into this area, which should create opportunities for flanking and contesting the objective. And the playstyle here is going to change depending on where you are. The tower gives defenders high ground and a good position for longer range weapons, but it's also vulnerable to explosives. Meanwhile, the underground section should favor close quarter weapons, so again, you have a pretty straightforward rule. Outside and on the high ground, expect longer range fights. Underground, expect close quarter battles. And if you're attacking, don't necessarily run straight into the objective, look for other routes. Developers specifically designed the area around multiple approaches. Next up is Heel Point Barracks. This area has 3 adjacent buildings around the main capture area, and these buildings can be used in a few different ways. They can be defensive positions, they can be used to shake off players chasing you, they can be destroyed and turned into rubble that provides new cover, and underneath this area is where another part of the tunnel network begins. So this is one of those locations where I wouldn't think of the buildings as permanent structures. If the enemy is hiding inside them, just destroy them. If you're being pushed, use the rubble, and if you're trying to rotate to another objective, look for the tunnels. The map is giving you a lot of different options here. Then we have Hangar 1. This is probably one of the most important areas on the entire map. It's the primary hangar and airstrip, and because of its central location, the developers saw a huge amount of foot traffic here during playtesting, and it's easy to understand why. You've got a massive interior space with vehicles, long sight lines, also with close quarter areas, and you've got multiple routes connecting this area to the rest of the map. So this is likely to be one of those places where the fight can change very quickly. You might have an armored vehicle driving through the hangar, you might have infantry fighting inside, you might have someone holding a long sight line from outside, and then suddenly a squad comes through a tunnel or from the shipwreck. So if you're a good casual player, don't be surprised if Hangar 1 feels a bit chaotic. That's basically the point, and it's because it's centrally located. It's also somewhere you'll probably be fighting a lot. Now moving toward the other side of the map, we have the Ammunition and Ordnance Depot. There are 6 ammunition structures here, and these provide a mixture of cover and elevation, but there's an important catch. They can explode. So if you're using these structures as cover, remember that they're not necessarily going to stay there. This is another example of how destruction is going to play a role in Wake Island, and there's also a less obvious flanking route on the southwest side of that area. The developers say there's less foot traffic here during testing, which could make it a useful route for infantry and boat players looking to flank. So if you're constantly running into a wall of enemies at the main objective, don't necessarily keep doing the same thing. Sometimes the quieter route can be the better route. The next point of interest is True Energy Hydrocarbons Fuel Storage. This is another major combat area with both interior and exterior spaces. The objective is generally located in the middle of the complex, and there are multiple levels and sight lines looking toward the shipwreck. That makes this another location where you have a combination of infantry and vehicle combat. And it's because it's close to the water, naval players can also provide support. There's also a bridge and small complex connecting fuel storage to the docks, another area where land and naval vehicles can fight each other, while infantry with anti-armor weapons can use the multi-story buildings to attack vehicles. So if you're an infantry player and you're tired of trying to fight vehicles out in the open, get inside the buildings. Use the height, wait for the vehicles to expose themselves, and then hit it when you actually have an advantage. Then we have the docks, which is essentially the island's main port, and this is another area where the water actually matters. The developers specifically designed the capture areas around the docks so that they extend into the water. That means boats aren't just sitting outside the objective shooting at people, they can actually participate in capturing and contesting it. So if you're playing a mode where the docks are an objective, expect this to be a pretty interesting mix of infantry and naval combat. And again, don't be afraid to approach from the water. The enemy may be watching the obvious land route, they may not be watching the boat coming around the other side. One of the other important tips from developers is tactical destruction, and I think this is something casual players can easily overlook. We've become so used to buildings and cover simply being part of the map that it's easy to forget that you can actually change the battlefield. On Wake Island, destroying ammunition structures and buildings can open up new routes and create new pieces of cover, and sometimes it can even get you a kill. So don't just shoot the guys hiding behind the building, ask yourself, can we destroy that? If its answer is yes, that might be a better play, especially if you're trying to clear an objective. So if I had to boil this entire developer map guide down to 3 things for someone who's going to play Wake Island casually, these would be my biggest takeaways. Number 1, use the map's alternative routes. Don't just run from objective to objective in a straight line. The tunnels and waterways exist for a reason. If the main route is being locked down, find another one. Number 2, play to your weapon. If you're using an SMG, carbine, another close range weapon, get into buildings and tunnels and close that distance. If you're using a long range weapon, take advantage of those open sight lines. And number 3, don't ignore the vehicles. Wake Island is designed around combined arms, that includes boats. You don't have to become a dedicated vehicle player, but understanding when a boat, tank, or aircraft can help your squad is going to make you a much more useful teammate. And that's essentially the developer guide for Wake Island. Translating into what I think actually matters for the average Battlefield player, there's obviously a lot more history and detail around the map, and if you've been playing Battlefield since 1942, you'll probably recognize plenty of these locations already, but for everyone else, I think the important thing is that Wake Island isn't simply Battlefield 5's map dropped into Battlefield 6. The developers spent some time in changing the routes, adding the shipwreck, expanding the role of naval combat, adding more ways for infantry to move around the island, and try to give players more options without completely filling the map with cover. So if you're looking forward to Wake Island, let me know in the comments what version of the map you've enjoyed the most over the years, and if you're new to the map, hopefully this gives you a better idea of what you're getting into when it arrives next week. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Be sure to spread some positivity, and I'll see you in the next one.